Are they saying the quiet part out loud? Well, speaking at the World Economic Forum, editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, Emma Tucker, bemoaned the eradication of public trust in media and how journalists now actually have to show how they do their work. What a concept.
If you go back really not that long ago, as I say, we owned the news. We were the gatekeepers, and we very much owned the facts as well. If it said it in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, then that was a fact. Nowadays, people can go to all sorts of different sources for the news, and they're much more questioning about what we're saying. So it's no longer good enough for us just to say, this is what happened, or this is the news. We have to explain, almost like explain our working. So readers expect to understand how we source stories. They want to know how we go about getting stories. We have to sort of lift the bonnet, as it were, and in a way that newspapers aren't used to doing, and explain to people what we're doing. We need to be much more transparent about how we go about collecting the news.
I mean, it's a stunning admission. Weirdly self-aware and not self-aware at the same time. She's right that the mainstream media have been gatekeepers for a very long time. The online, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Twitter, whether it's the blogosphere, dynamic has disrupted the bloggers and gatekeepers that used to uniquely decide what kind of news and information the broader public saw. The proliferation even of news channels and mainstream news diversified that a little bit over the course of the last 30 years or so. And now we live in a place where there's a lot of information out there, and that's why we have this intense focus on the misinformation crisis. It's less about the quality of the information than the realization that the gatekeepers no longer have the ability to block the way they used to and to curate exactly what news makes it through.
Yeah, everything she was saying there is descriptively correct. The question is, you're trying to read her tone.
Right.
I think it's a little bit like she's saying this and that's bad.
Right.
Whereas I would say everything she just said, and that has some downsides, but it has also a tremendous amount of positives that the media now feels, media institutions now feel pressure to explain how they arrive at their conclusions, how reporting works, why they choose to do the work that they're doing, and that they face robust competition from all corners of the media landscape, that there's a much broader and diversified ecosystem, including social media, including video, TV, radio, podcasts, and on and on and on, that there is no, there's no, journalism, it was always wrong for journalists to see themselves as this elite credentialed profession, whereas you went to an elite school and you got a very special degree, and that made you now qualified to weigh in on affairs of state and the matters of the day. Actually, journalism is a craft. It's a practice. It's like weightlifting or something. You get stronger, you get better. The more you do it, the more you do reporting. Everyone is capable of doing it. People like Julian Assange have shown that there's no special category of people. Anyone who works to publish information that the public ought to know, that it's in the public interest, is engaged in the work of journalism, and that is a good thing that more people are doing that. The technology exists. That was the major innovation. That it used to just be very hard to,
right.
I mean, it's hard to run a newspaper.
To publish your own stuff independently.
Now it is easy. Anyone can do it. And I think that's better. And it has made the conversations wilder, and you have to be careful because there's a lot of wrong, false, misleading information out there, what the fact checkers and the misinformation people are always warning about. But the issue is there used to be false, bad information produced by the mainstream journalism institutions, and they didn't compete with each other as much, so they weren't calling each other out. Now we have this dynamic where there's an entire right-wing media apparatus, there's an entire left-wing media apparatus, there's the mainstream media, and there's all these platforms, and they're all fighting all the time, so you have to decide for yourself who you trust and which story you think is right. But that's better when it's all just a handful of companies saying the same things.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't entirely poo-poo the concern of how do you understand what the truth is. I think you're right to say that that wasn't a concern that was born fully grown out of Zeus's head overnight in the advent of social media. It has always been the case. But these days, I do think there is perhaps more of an opportunity for bad faith actors to put stuff out there that they know not to be true, just simply because the economy is such that everybody has an opportunity to put everything out there. And I do think that it's worth having conversations about how to have media literacy. It's something that used to be taught in schools more. How to assess what sources are. How to, be wary, especially in the age of AI, about manipulated images and deepfakes and those kinds of things. We've seen so much conflicting evidence, for example, obviously come out of Gaza, where you have newsrooms making the choice, an editorial choice, to say to their writers, you must describe death tolls, let's say, as Hamas death tolls, or to describe Houthi fighters as Iranian-backed fighters, when there isn't the same kind of effort to say this is a U.S.-backed Israeli force, or to say these are IDF numbers or statements or whatever information is coming out of another party that obviously has its own interests and is self-interested, as all parties are. Right now, there's a story going on coming out of Australia where there's been a no confidence vote for ABC, Australian Broadcasting leadership, partly because they've forced their employees to not use the word genocide, for example. So I'm also really interested within legacy media, the internal fights that folks are having about these standards that are coming from the top down that don't seem to be dictated by necessarily journalistic integrity, or saying we're going to let the editorial board say this and these employees can say this and these employees can say that, but having these top-down edicts. How can these institutions really lay any claim to any kind of journalistic integrity or objectivity when they're just pressing their own bottom line, as so many people are across these different platforms?
What did they say? They told the employees not to say the word genocide in their reporting, or what?
Yes. The head, I think his name is Anderson, gave this following edict. He told the staff there had been a recent directive that the word genocide could not be used to describe the Israeli military campaign in Gaza, even when quoting someone, without it being, quote, upwardly referred to a manager, but that, quote, we can talk to any of the victims of the Hamas October 7th massacre, which we should, and we put that to air. Quote, it's only ever one side of things that really has motivated me and I want to speak about. This is from a reporter who's talking to the press and frustrated about it, named Lyons. He said staff were also often, quote, thrown under the bus by management, and staff were beginning to self-censor as a result.
So the interesting thing, this coming up at Davos, obviously, where they were talking about this media reality. I did a radar last week that if you missed it, you should check out, about the misinformation concerns specifically. They always do a panel every year about misinformation now, and it got ranked actually as the #1 short-term global threat. The experts, the kind of people who go to Davos, very concerned about what you said, the ability of people to consume misleading news or misleading images or AI-generated stuff. Of course, there's so far from looking at studies, people aren't as easily fooled as you might expect. There's a lot of more media literacy would always be good. I'm not saying I'm against it by any stretch of the imagination, but most of the research I've seen suggests that overwhelming majority of people can tell or don't share news that is absolutely made up, fake images or something. It's a small number of people who do it. It tends to be older Americans. Younger people are very adept at seeing through that kind of stuff.
That's hard for me to believe when you had, I'm sorry to keep bringing this up, but the 40 beheaded baby story gets so much traction that even the President of the United States of America was repeating it repeatedly from the podium, even though we subsequently have reporting that his own staff warned him against bringing up that particular quote. And we see it still being bandied about. There was a reference to multiple beheaded babies in the Israeli defense in front of the ICJ just a week or two ago. So, I take your point that it might be more overblown than people say, but especially when there's a lot of power and interest and money behind a certain claim, I think actually some random grandma saying, drinking honey cures cancer on the internet is much less pernicious than when you have governments, for instance, advancing certain narratives, including our own.
But that's always been the case. Now we have, the scrutiny of claims Biden makes about Gaza or about any other subject get shredded on social media, and they get promoted too. But it used to be just uncritical promotion. Now there's people who can undermine the things that the propaganda.
That's a fair point. I guess I'd just say, if the core, we're talking about the core problem of misinformation spreading, I think I am frankly more concerned about it coming from the top. With the internet people debunking it doesn't help if we don't have the same platform of the President of the United States of America going before the entire nation and doubling down and tripling down. I do think
the president always had that platform, is what I'm saying. Now we have platforms too.
I don't disagree. This is obviously not a critique of that. Sure. I'm just saying there is a misinformation problem, but it's coming from the top.
Sure. More Rising right after this.